friends, welcome to Life Talk. On this program, where we talk about the things that matter most in life, we're going to switch the tables around a little bit. And on this show, my mother, Sharon, is actually going to be interviewing me. So many people have been wondering a little bit more about my hearing loss and what I've encountered with it over the years, and just really all about how I've dealt with it. And in a concert, there's only so much we can share, and Mom shares some of her end of it and I share some of my end of it. But we thought we'd just take a program and deal specifically with the subject of hearing loss and hearing from him. So without any further ado, I am going to turn the program over to my mother, Sharon.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming back to hear us again. And I thought it would be just fun for me to ask Sherry Ann some questions that are probably you're all thinking about when a person can't hear. What's the struggles? What's it like? What do they hear? Different things like that. So we'll just go right into the program with some questions. So I think people would be interested in hearing firsthand an account of some of the challenges you've had. I know that as your mom, I don't even know what they all are and still don't. So I struggle to understand it as much as you struggle to deal with it. So why don't you talk about that?
Challenges being hearing impaired. Well, for one, the biggest challenge that we deal with, and I've heard some other mothers have talked to me about it in concert, is not understanding how you hear some things, but you don't hear other things. And that's the challenge of being hearing impaired. I am not totally deaf. I am part hearing, but I am part deaf. So why do I hear some things and not other things? Because I am part hearing and part deaf. And what people don't realize, and what we've had to come to realize, is that every letter of the alphabet carries its own frequency. And some frequencies are high and some frequencies are low. So depending on the hearing loss that that person has, they may be able to hear high, or they may be able to hear low. Unfortunately, I hear low fairly well, medium not so well, and high really not at all. And your voice, Mom, we've always talked about this over the years, tends to fall on the higher end of the frequency. So my brother and my mom can be in the room together, and I can hear my brother, but I can't hear my mom because of the frequency of her voice. And so that's where people think, oh, selective hearing, or you're only hearing what you want to hear. Believe me, we want to hear it all, and that's what people don't understand, is that we want to hear. Whereas people who are so used to hearing for so long, they tune out what they don't want to hear. But conversely, the opposite is true. People who can't hear actually have something called recruiters, and the recruiters recruit all the sensory fibers, turn on, and they try to pick up as much as they possibly can. So we want to hear. It's not selective by any means. We can't. We simply cannot. I do not have the receptors to hear certain frequencies and certain sounds. Now, the other thing is, words carry frequencies and sounds. So my mother may say...
Letters as well. So do the letters.
My mother may say, shut the door. Okay, well, door is a pretty hard-sounding word, and I get that. But she may say, do you want some fish? See? Now, the F and the S and the H are all letters that I can't hear. So if she says, do you want some fish? What? What is this? What? But if she says shut the door, I can pretty much hear shut the door, and that doesn't really, nothing else really kind of rhymes with that I could think of. So it all depends on what you're saying.
I think what you're trying to explain for you to understand is that vowels sound different than consonants.
Yes.
So Sherry hears the vowels.
Yes.
But she does not hear the consonants. So think about that. Think about the letter S. Hear that sound? S. If you don't hear that, how do you make that sound? And so that's been the struggle for her life, to say, well, there's only 5 vowels and the rest are consonants. And so if you're trying to say the letter S, you hear that little S on the end of it. Well, she doesn't hear that. She doesn't hear that. We hear it. But how do you make a sound that you don't hear? So think about that. All the consonants have sounds, and they're soft sounds. And she doesn't.
Some of the fricatives have soft sounds. There's different names for different sounds.
And she doesn't hear them, and yet she has to learn to produce that sound.
And that leads into speech therapy, which is why I had to take speech therapy for 7 years. For 7 years, I took speech therapy to learn how to make a sound that I can't hear. And how did I do that? Well, my teacher had me work in front of a mirror extensively. I had to look at the position of my tongue and my teeth and my lips. So she would make the sound, and I may not have heard, especially then. I have hearing aids that are super powerful now, so I've been able to pick up some S sounds, but then I could not pick them up at all. So it was a matter of putting my hand in front of my mouth and blowing and feeling like I had to feel the air in front of her face and then feel air in front of my face. So if I wasn't putting air out, then I wasn't making the sound.
And actually, the therapist had me put a little hand mirror in the refrigerator or even the freezer. I can't remember which, but it would come out with like a fog on it. And then I had to have her say the S, and if her air blew a hole in the fog that was on the mirror, then she knew that she made the sound.
There was a lot of really clever things that she did, and one of my favorite memories, I don't even know if you know this, but was she would give me cranberry muffins, and I to this day love cranberry muffins because whenever I would get words right, that's what she would give me. And it's still emotional for me even now because it really was hard to pronounce sounds that you can't hear. Right. And it would be hours and hours. And I remember coming home upset. I remember throwing books. I remember that because hearing impaired people get very frustrated. Again, try to do something that you can't. Try to see a sunset that you can't see. Try to say a sound that you can't hear. So it was very frustrating, and you were very hard with me on speech therapy, and I would say, I don't want to do it.
I was very hard because I didn't want her to be made fun of.
And I was.
And she was anyway, but not as much, I think, as she could have, because even still, till today, I hear people say, you speak better than most or any hearing impaired person I've ever heard speak, and that's because I really was devoted and dedicated to help her make these sounds so that she doesn't sound like the typical hearing impaired person. She doesn't. As a matter of fact, most people always ask her what country she's from because she sounds like she has a little European accent. And we can live with that, people like that. But when you listen to someone who really can't speak and pronounce the sounds they can't hear, it's very disparaging. It's very difficult to understand them. And believe it or not, most people don't even know that she's hearing impaired because she speaks so well, so clearly, and is an excellent lip reader.
But that leads into what are the challenges. Because they can't necessarily pick up that I'm hearing impaired, they don't realize that I am. So they don't face me. They don't talk louder, not screaming. There's a big difference. You can talk louder. I project my voice and speak very loudly without screaming. But they don't face me. They don't acknowledge me in a way that, they don't get my attention before speaking to me. And once again, when I hear some of what they're saying and not the other half of what they're saying, they get very frustrated with me. So the challenges are great, and I don't want to make hearing loss be any more special than somebody who's born without limbs or somebody who can't see. I don't want to make it any more special than that, but I need to read this poem to you that you gave me a long time ago. And the hearing loss is truly one of the most, or at least in my opinion, it's one of the more difficult disabilities, and here's why. This was written by Ann Landers published this. It was written by William Barclay, and this helps you to understand the issue with being hearing impaired. It says, oh God, the trouble about being deaf is that most people find deaf folks a nuisance. Now, they sympathize with people who are blind and lame, but they get irritated and annoyed with people who are deaf. And the result of this is that deaf people are apt to avoid company, and they get more and more shut in. Help me now that my hearing has begun to go. Help me face the situation and realize there's no good way to hide it. Trying will only make matters worse. Help me be grateful for all that can be done for people like me. If I have to wear a hearing aid, and I wear two, help me to do so naturally and not be embarrassed. Give me the perseverance to not let this trouble get me down. Don't let it cut me off from others. And help me to remember, Lord, nothing can stop me from hearing your voice, whatever happens.
That was a prayer that I gave her when she was really small. I don't know, maybe 7. But that was important to me. I really didn't know the Lord at that time. Can you imagine that? But I knew that it was important that even though she didn't hear the things of this world, and I say this many times, in many ways, it's a good thing we don't hear all the things of this world, but that she would never stop hearing his voice. And she didn't.
I think that the reason this touches me so much is because, if somebody is in a wheelchair and they're approaching a door, now this is before I was diagnosed, in the 70s. And that's a whole nother story. They didn't even know I was hearing impaired until I was failing out of school. So I had already developed poor speech patterns, and I had developed lip reading as a way of coping because they didn't know I was hearing impaired. So I started lip reading, and I had poor speech patterns, but they thought that was just because I was a 4 and 5-year-old. And when I began failing out of school, and then the nurse conducted a school physical.
Well, let me just interject here for just a minute. And talking about her poor speech patterns, children are really cute when they're trying to say things. And Sherry Ann had a lot of really cute little things that I passed off as being adorable. For example, she would say Shirley Pimple instead of Shirley Temple. Why? Because she couldn't distinguish between the T and the P, because all she hears in those sounds is the E. So she didn't know if it was T or P, you see? And so, or she would say something that her brain would put together, because Sherry's brain is really wired very differently, very differently. It's almost like putting together a Rubik's Cube or a puzzle all day long. And you can see that in her normal living activities when you're with her for a length of time. Or she would say something like Elvis Pretzel instead of Elvis Presley. George Washing Machine. You see, there's a place where she would put
what I heard before, washing machine.
Like solve a puzzle, right? Washing machine instead of George Washington. And we thought it was adorable, and really it was, but it was not so funny when we found out what it was.
And then I know we kind of left you hanging on that with me saying why this is so personal to me. And the reason is because when you see somebody in a wheelchair, and again, like I said, this is before before Disabilities Act and before we had all these handicap doors and things like that, you would go up and you would open the door for that person, and you would ask, oh, can I help you? Can I open the door for you? And you would be patient. If it took that person, 10 minutes to get through the door, you would hold the door for 10 minutes. But if it takes a person 10 minutes to understand what you're saying, how patient are you with that person? If somebody said, what did you say, for 10 minutes, you're not going to be patient with that person. In fact, you know the phrase, and I know it better than anybody. Forget it. Doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. Forget it.
Not important.
Heard that. It's not important. And to me, I don't care if the statement isn't important, but hearing you is, and hearing what you said is. So hearing impaired people, they say there's mannerisms that go with each disability. So for blind, they rock and sway. It's kind of how they sense and feel their environment because they can't see it. And it maybe gives them a sense of spatial perception. And there's different things that people do. For hearing impaired people, it's frustration and anger. It's actually a trait that goes along with the disability. And you can be around that, watch people sign, and also being dramatic is a part of it because they get so tongue-tied trying to speak that they use their hands and their bodies and their faces to say what they're trying to say, which in my case has worked favorably in the ministry.
In the ministry, which is her own individual form of sign language. And I can remember saying to her when she was younger, because after all, there's no hearing loss in my family on her father's side or my side. So this was not anything I was familiar with at all. And I would say to her, do you have to be so dramatic when you're explaining something? And it wasn't until many, many, many years later that I realized
when you came into contact with deaf culture and saw other deaf individuals.
It's actually a form of sign language.
Because, I talk so big, and yes, we joke, my mother's Italian, I'm Italian, so there's part of that, sure. But my gestures are much bigger than even my mother's, and she's full-blooded Italian, I'm only half, and so a lot of that is just me trying to express myself. Like we said, speech therapy, to try to learn how to talk And the people have asked me, they tell me that they can identify, the people that work with deaf culture or those who are hearing impaired can identify that I am by certain sounds, and that's the letter R.
Yes.
I don't know why, but for some reason when we say the letter R, our tongue doesn't touch the roof of our mouth the way it's supposed to. I guess it's supposed to touch your palate, or maybe not touch your palate. It's supposed to, I think it rolls off the palate basically. Or maybe we roll it and it sounds more like a Spanish R is what I'm told. It kind of rolls, our tongue rolls instead of kind of touches the palate and comes back down. I don't
actually try it
get
yourself. As she's talking, I'm sitting here trying to say R, trying to form it and seeing what my tongue does in relationship to my palate, and it's strange to figure out. Try it for yourself.
And the crazy, so I don't hear the letter S, and I can't say the letter R. And my mother named me Sherry. So I have had the hardest time. One of the hardest things I've had to say my whole life is my name. And I don't like to say my name because people think I'm saying Shelly. They think I'm saying Sherry with a W, Shelly with L's.
Shirley.
Shirley, I've gotten Sherry, S-H-A-R, and that has nothing to do, and you will testify to this, has nothing to do with a New York accent, because New York, I live in New York, and every day, everywhere I go, people ask me where I'm from and what country I'm from. So it has nothing to do with being in New York, because New Yorkers ask me, where's that accent from? Now, certain sounds may have something to do with it, but as a whole, my speech pattern does not. So and then other people say, well, you sound terrific. And that's because I do work on inflection. Like deaf people don't understand inflection and intonation. And so I've worked on inflection and I've worked on pronunciation. And I think one of the most meaningful things for me, you asked me about the most challenging, but one of the most beneficial things has been that people who come to my concerts, many of them up in years have said to me that I can understand you better than any other singer I have ever heard. Because you take the time to pronounce the words. And quite frankly, if I didn't, you wouldn't understand what I'm saying.
Right, so she has to think of the melody, she has to think of the pitch, and she has to think of forming letters she can't hear all the while that she's singing. So you see what I'm saying about her brain? It functions differently.
And of course, that always leads to the question of how do you hear and how do you sing? And I'm going to, what may seem like take the easy way out, but it's the honest way, is to say that that's from God. That's a gift from God, to be able to have an affinity for music and to be able to even attempt to do it. That is from God. It's just something I have always felt, something I have always loved is music. It's I think I truly have had a love affair with music since I was very little. My parents were ballroom dance teachers. So interestingly enough, I would hear pounding to the beat because they taught downstairs beneath the house. And I would hear the pounding and I would hear my mother clapping 1 and 2. And so I would hear that for years, and I grew accustomed to music, to beat, and I like music with a beat. And some of my music had some heavy instrumentation and heavy beat. Yes, it helps me to hear that. And so I've always loved it, and I sang all through school, and I was selected for all county choir, and I was selected for some solo parts even in school. And then at the time, I wanted to go away from music. And of course, I'm 16, 17 years old, and at this time...
And I'm Italian, and she wanted to go to New York City.
And you were a single mom?
Absolutely not.
And she said no. And so that's how I ended up becoming a chiropractor, which I'm since retired from. And now we're back on the road full-time, singing and bringing Mom with me. Because God has a way of making things full circle and giving us the desires of our heart. And so, but what's happened in that all that time that I worked as a chiropractor is I pursued my craft. I took voice lessons, and my teacher really helped me to hear pitch up against the piano. So we use the piano.
Actually, explain what pieces of instrument you hear and don't hear.
Yes, and so the piano is very helpful. My voice teacher would really kind of pound on that piano, and I would learn to recognize pitch from hearing the piano. And I developed my skills, and my hearing aids got much better as time went on. And being able to hear better, having pitch recognition with the piano, and then something called muscle memory is key for me. That's a big way of how I sing. In other words, I pretty much have to sing the same way every time. I have to memorize where the notes are, what they sound like, and what they feel like. and spit them back every time. So I'm not a singer that maybe takes a lot of liberty, like one of my favorite singers of all time, Whitney Houston, and she could sing all over the charts. I can't, and just improvise a lot. I can't do that because I need to stay in tune with my melody and my pitches. So it's just lining up with that melody and just consistently putting it out every time. So I've had people in the studio tell me I'm actually a very consistent singer because of that.
Because your brain is memorizing the sound of the note, and it doesn't necessarily mean that she hears the sound the way you and I do. It doesn't mean that at all. It means that her brain interprets that sound in a certain way to her, which her voice teacher, piano teacher, whoever will say, that's the note, and then she locks it in. But how she hears it in her brain is probably very different on how we hear it, because a lot of times she'll say to me, oh, I don't think I was on pitch, and I'll say, yeah, you were. So it's tricky. So what, in regards to that, what sounds do you actually hear? I remember when you made the music Silent Prayer, the beautiful song Silent Prayer, I said to you, do you hear that guitar? It sounds like it's crying. And she said, what guitar?
Yeah. So that's a really tricky question. I don't hear much of anything. I hear noise. The best way I can explain it to people is if you live in America and you only know English, but you go to Spain and you turn on the radio and it's all Spanish music. You hear the music, you hear blah, 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 but you don't know what anybody's saying. You don't know anything that's going on. That's my world all the time in America with English. I know that I hear the noise. I know there's instrumentation happening, but it's a big cacophony. It's a big blend. So I didn't know that there was a little guitar whining in the background for Silent Prayer. Check that out. I'll put the video link for you. And I didn't know that, like, on Wonderful Merciful Savior, there was a beautiful cello. And Labor of Love, like Christmas song that I sing, there's a beautiful cello kind of weeping and dancing in the background. And I didn't know that. So what happens is people in the studio are kind enough to, you can actually let the singer hear in the headphones whatever instrument they want to hear. So if I want to hear what the guitar is doing, they just turn everybody else off and let me hear the guitar. And then they let me hear the flute. That's another instrument I cannot hear. Beautiful by itself, I hear it, but in a crowd, in a group, I will never hear it. So the flute or the violin or the strings are very hard to hear. In fact, I can't hear the piano once the bass gets going and the electric guitar gets going. I hear the bass, the drums and the electric, that's pretty much what I hear. And I hear the rest of this beautiful blend, but I couldn't tell you what instrument was in there for anything. And then when you section out the parts for me and you let me hear them, then I go back and hear the song and I can start to, not fully, but I can start to pick out, oh, there's the cello in there. But you've got to point it out to me,
and
really
it wouldn't
strongly.
be for a long period of time. I think she would hear just a piece of it here and a piece
Only
of
when
that
I'm focusing on it.
Right.
Just for that time that I focus on it. But if I'm up there singing in a concert, I forget it's there all over again.
Right.
So how do you keep the beat? Pretty much the drums and pretty much just that instinctive thing. When I was a little girl, my mom was pounding on the basement and clapping, and I do think I have an inherent sense of rhythm, and I think I got that from you and Dad, quite frankly.
You do have an inherent sense of rhythm. She does. She has beautiful rhythm, beautiful grace. If you watch her sing, that isn't anything that anyone taught her. As she said, I was a professional dance instructor, so it isn't anything that I took the time to show her. She just acquired it through music. I think it's because she feels the music rather than hears the music, so she can kind of move her body and her hands to what she feels.
It's an expression again. It's a way to convey the message, because I don't always feel like I can do it here, so I express it here.
Right. So why don't you tell the story of how you found out that you were hearing impaired?
Basically, again, struggling in school, not making the grade, being punished, being put in a corner, being told to write on the blackboard, I will not talk. That has happened to me because I wasn't following instruction, wasn't listening.
So let me interrupt here for just a second, because it's funny now, but it wasn't funny then. When she was prior up to 5 years old, I thought she was the most belligerent child I could have ever had. She never came when I called her. She never turned to look at me. She didn't do what she was told. If I gave her an instruction or an order, just go about her business. And so that didn't make for a good relationship between Sherry and I, because I really never picked up that there was a problem. So I corrected her, disciplined her, punished her. As we look back on it now, you can see through the beautiful divine substance of forgiveness of the Christ that we spoke on in our previous message, that there was a lot of that was needed to be done between us because of that lack of nurturing that she got through those years.
Yeah, and true. And from home right to school. So I became a pretty tough kid, and I became, and I also became tough in terms of, I did learn to kind of stand up for myself as time went on, but I also have, built a lot of walls and boundaries too because of it. And so thankfully.
And you fought for position.
Mm-hmm.
She fought for position. I'm telling you, she fought for position, because if she can control the conversation, she knows what's going on. But if she's trying to come in on the conversation that she's not controlling, it's lost to her.
So what she's saying is we become very dominant people. Mm-hmm. It's not, again, that's not my heritage or my state of origin as much as it is the disability. You control your environment, you control your world, because if I say, hey, come into a room, and I decide we're going to talk about Hawaii and vacationing, then I know what we're talking about, and I can start to put together the puzzles of the words. Did they say Aruba or did they say tuba? Oh, we're talking about Hawaii, so they probably said Aruba, because all I heard was Uba. But if I come into a room and you all are talking about something and I'm trying to jump in, oh, that's just not going to happen. I'm lost. I don't know what you're saying, and I have no background to start, because I have a puzzle, and I don't know, do I pull from the Hawaiian words or do I pull from the musical words? Are they saying tuba? Are they saying Aruba? I don't know the subject matter. So what happens is we come in a room and we start talking and we start making the subject matter just to give us a foundation with what to work with. Right. And so that had a tendency to ostracize friends from me all through school. You're controlling or you're domineering. And, certainly that can be worked with, and certainly there was a place for learning how to not be that way. But learning why am I that way was the key to being able to change that and to fix that.
That's where all the pieces were lost in her growing up. No one understood her world, and she didn't do a really good job explaining her world. Maybe because she didn't even understand it herself. I don't know. But all she tried to do was navigate in her world. And
well, you can't explain something you don't know.
True. So the accomplishments that she's made, when there have been many, I mean, far more than I ever accomplished in my life, and I can hear, were basically because of her own perseverance and determination not to fail.
And I don't know if I actually have addressed the actual diagnosis. That did come from school, and that did come from a school physical. The nurse determined it. You asked me how they actually diagnosed it, and the nurse determined it. And I basically failed the hearing test. And they called my mom, and she got a first opinion. And the first doctor, you want to tell them what happened there?
Well, when the nurse called me, she said to me, we have a problem with your daughter. And I said to myself in an arrogant manner, oh, I'm sure you do. You understand what I'm saying? I thought it was her discipline problem. Because when I got her report card, everything was unsatisfactory. Everything. From behavior to subject matter to music, everything. So I'm thinking, she's just not paying attention. What is wrong with her? So when they told me that was my response. My immediate response was, yes, I know. I'm sure she's a problem. She said, no, you don't understand. Your daughter's severely hearing impaired. And I thought, well, this can't be. This is impossible. I mean, it shook my world. It took me to a place of barrenness that I don't think I've ever known. Just total despair and shock. It's like, this can't be true. So I took her to an ENT who was supposed to be the #1 ENT in the city. And he put her in his chair, and he stood, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 feet away from her. And he whispered, or didn't even make a sound. He just spoke with his mouth, "Can you hear me?" And she answered him. And she said, "Yes, I can." And then he said a few other things, and she answered him. And you know what he said to me? He turned to me and he said, "Your daughter, there's nothing wrong with her. She's a spoiled brat." That's the gospel truth. So at that point in my life, I thought, okay, now something's really wrong here. Either I'm right or something is really wrong. This person is supposed to be top of the line. But again, this had to be God ordained and God led because I didn't know the Lord. But I was determined to find out the truth about her. And so I took her to now a facility that's all they did was hearing and speech exams. That's what they're known for. And they gave her the test, and they called me in the room, and they showed me her graph. And it was from moderate hearing loss to profound.
Which is why it's hard to give a percentage. I get asked for percentages all the time, but it's a range. It's actually a slope. So if you look at my graph, it goes from like the drop off, like goes from hearing at the high end normal. I mean, I hear at the low end normal, and then the graph just it plummets when it gets to a higher frequency. So it's just like a ski slope. So it's really hard to give a percentage because it's a range. It's a whole range of sound. They just get missing the higher and higher it goes.
Yeah, so it's not easy to live in a hearing world when you're hearing impaired, but it's
certainly not easy to sing and speak.
Right, but it's twice as difficult to navigate in that when no one knows you are and you're trying to correct all those things yourself. I'll tell you a funny story, or I'll let my daughter tell you about how I got introduced to her world. One day we were traveling on the road and I got lost. And I said, well, let's stop at this gas station here and let's get directions from this fella. Now, there's no reason to tell you this for any other reason other than for you to understand what she hears. So I walked in, and the gentleman was of Chinese origin, and I asked him directions, and I'll let her tell the rest of the story.
So I only hear vowels. And if you ever listen to somebody speak from another country, their vowels are, they have a hard time with their consonants, right? A lot of times RWs become Vs for them. The Rs aren't pronounced right. Very similar to a hearing impaired person. So this man did, because he was so, my guess is he was probably born in China. So Chinese was his first language. English was his second language. God bless him for that. And God bless him for attempting to give us direction. But he was not good with pronouncing consonants at all. So basically, he said direction to my mom, and my mom came out of the place, and her eyes were this big, and she went, I don't know. I have no idea what he just said. I don't know. And we were completely lost, didn't have a GPS. And so I said, I got this. So I said, sir, what are you telling us? And he, go and I said, oh, go right at McDonald's, go left at Wendy's. Right. And he goes, yeah. I mean, go right at McDonald's, go left at Wendy's, because I only hear the vowels anyways. So, and my whole world is basically trying to figure out what the consonants were. So, I is go right, is McDonald's. So that's a lot of my world. And again, this is only to make an illustration of what I hear only.
Right. It was her way of helping me to understand, welcome to my world, Mother.
I mean, to be honest, he spoke very well as far as I was concerned. As far as my mother was concerned.
She understood everything.
I understood him perfectly, so I had no problem. So there's some benefits, and yes, I can read lips from across the room and stuff like that, and I can do all that kind of stuff. And people ask me, have you met Sue Thomas of FBI? Yes, I have. It's been amazing. A lot of people, because I have a history of modeling, have asked me. Some people, when I travel across the country, and I've won some pageants, they say, you're not Miss America who won in 1995. And I say, no, that was Heather Whitestone. So have not met her, certainly would love to. But it's been a very interesting journey.
So now I have a little surprise for Sherry Ann. So there is an organization, and I want to tell you just real quick about it. It's called Hear Strong, and it's an organization that recognizes remarkable people with hearing loss and gives them a platform to empower others. I chose to nominate Sherry Ann as a Hear Strong champion because I admire how you always advocate for yourself and others, and take every opportunity about hearing loss in her community and anywhere that she goes. She's very sensitive to the disabled, not just the hearing impaired, but to the disabled. So I nominated her, and by God's blessing, she was awarded this. I don't know if you can see it, but it's Hear Strong Championship Certificate.
Oh, very nice.
And it says, this certifies that Sherry Ann has been named a Hear Strong Champion in recognition of the determined spirit and unwavering heart they exhibit in conquering their hearing loss and inspiring others to do the same. So for me, she was this champion, and she had accomplished all of this. So Sherry, we present that to you.
Thank
and
you.
To make it official, I guess you have to agree to what I'm going to read. So this is the proclamation. As a Hear Strong champion, you will continue to be an important role model and hearing health advocate in your community. You must promise to use your voice, isn't that funny, to make a difference and create change for others with hearing loss. Are you up for the challenge?
I am.
So, with that,
Ooh,
they have
Gorgeous.
sent this. Maybe you can help me.
I see a little opening right there.
Okay.
Oh,
Look
wait
at
till you see
this. You look at this. Oh, so now you're going to see how tall I am, but I'm not going to get up because she's got it. Hear Strong Champion.
Very nice.
And I will place that
Aw.
around your neck.
Thank you.
And we also have, oh, look at this.
Ah, it matches.
A Hear Strong t-shirt. Isn't that cool? So,
Thank you. Thank you, Hear Strong. I appreciate you for recognizing, for what you're doing to help others, to help us, to help others. Thank you.
so I hope you celebrate this with us and realize that sometimes things aren't as easy as they look. So next time you hear Sherry Ann sing, now you understand some of the things that she has to do in order to bless you. So we hope that we take our imperfections to help perfect the heart of others.
And thank you for all that you have done and the struggle that has been to help me through.
We love you guys.
Thank you for joining us on Life Talk. God bless. Because I don't let on to the struggle that it really is.
Well, maybe people ought to see that.